I'm extremely excited to announce a brand new sponsor for the Behind the Shield podcast, and that is Rescue One CBD. For any of you who have listened to this podcast for the last 8 years, you would have heard my own personal journey from using prescription pills after a knee surgery to finding CBD and having incredible success with that. I then saw my son's wheezing diminish, my wife's anxiety, and so many more kind of success stories. The problem is, though, I've also seen the stigma and misunderstanding about this incredibly powerful plant medicine. When it comes to workplace drug testing, it's THC that they are looking for. The concentration is high in marijuana, but there is a small amount in most CBD products. And with John being a veteran firefighter paramedic himself, he was determined to find a product that was pure, that would ensure there was nothing in there that would put someone's career at risk. So he developed a 3-tier system. The third-party testing facility tests to parts per billion, which is the most minute amount I have ever heard of in all the time I've worked with CBD. The results of every batch are posted on their website, so you can literally see the same results that they see from the batch that you are ordering. Secondly, they include workplace drug test kits in the order when you order it. So if you have any fears, you get to do it just to appease it, even though this is a pure and safe product. Thirdly, they've just finished a year-long study with the University of Maryland and Arcadia University, and firefighters from all over the country sent in their urine samples, and not a single person failed a drug test. So you have 3 different tiers of trust with this particular product. Now, they have different flavors for their CBD. For anyone that's had it, that's just the CBD oil. It does not taste good, so they found a way of making it more palatable. They have a sleep remedy that has terpenes in, again, completely safe. That one's called Out of Service. And then topical CBD, obviously, for aches and pains on the outside. Now, on top of all that, Rescue One is offering you, the listener of the Behind the Shield podcast, 15% off your order if you use the code BTS, as in Behind the Shield. And you can find all of their products, you can find all of the testing and understand why this truly is a product that you can trust by going to rescue1cbd.com. And you can listen to my conversation with John on episode 1011 of the Behind the Shield podcast. This episode is sponsored by Team Builder, yet another company that's doing great things for the first responder community. As a strength and conditioning coach myself who also trains tactical athletes, dissemination of wellness information is one of the biggest challenges. Now, Team Builder is the premier strength and conditioning software for tactical athletes, and there are several features that really impress me. Firstly, there is a full exercise library, so you, the personal trainer, does not have to create that within your own department. Secondly, you can send out programming, but also individualize, which I love. So you blanket program for everyone. Now you can tweak based on someone's injury, someone's need to maybe drop some body composition, rather than having to write a program for every single person on their own. Team Builder also allows you to build custom questionnaires to collate health and wellness data. It integrates with wearables. And I think one of the most important things is obviously it tracks. To me, it's imperative that we as a profession start tracking our people from day one and then over the full span of their career, therefore catching potential wellness issues and injuries before they happen. Now, if you want to try Team Builder, they are offering you, the audience of the Behind the Shield podcast, a free 14-day trial to experience all of the features. And if you want to take a deeper dive into Team Builder, listen to episode 1032 with Melissa Mercado, or go to teambuilder.com. And I'll spell that to you because it's not as you'd think, teambuildr.com. Welcome to the Behind the Shield podcast. As always, my name's James Gearing, and this week it is my absolute honor to welcome on the show founder of Mindful Junkie Outreach, Gina Rollo White. Now, in this conversation, we discuss a host of topics, from her own journey into the world of mindfulness and meditation, working with the first responder population, breath work, tactical brain training, and so much more. Now, before we get to this incredible conversation, as I say every week, please just take a moment, go to whichever app you listen to this on, subscribe to the show, leave feedback, and leave a rating. Every single 5-star rating truly does elevate this podcast, therefore making it easier for others to find. And this is a free library of well over 1,000 episodes now. So all I ask in return is that you help share these incredible men and women's stories so I can get them to every single person on planet Earth who needs to hear them. So with that being said, I introduce to you Gina Rollo White. Enjoy. Well, Gina, I want to start by saying thank you so much for taking the time and coming on the Behind the Shield podcast today.
Yeah, I mean, thank you for having the Behind the Shield podcast. That's the real thanks.
So where on planet Earth are we finding you today?
So I am in Alexandria, Virginia, which is right across the bridge from Washington, D.C. And it's been snowing for like 4 days. And really what I want are my kids to go back to school. So that's it.
Yeah, we don't get snow days here in Florida. We have hurricane days. But
Yeah, exactly.
how bad has the snow been this year? Because obviously we've seen parts of the Northeast are certainly getting battered.
Yeah, it hasn't been bad. In fact, it's never in Alexandria, Virginia. We don't really get snow. It's interesting. We have snow days built into school, which is funny. I'm from California, so this whole concept of snow days was really new to me when I moved here. What's a snow day? So we have snow days where the kids miss school, but ever since COVID, they kind of have done away with that. They would build in like X number of snow days, and now they're like, screw it, we can just learn async. So they just put kids on pretend learning days. So that's fun. So my kids have been home for a really long time, and yeah, we don't get a lot of snow, and that makes me happy.
I saw a device, and I'm sure it's come from that, where you put your mouse of the computer on, and it makes it look like your cursor is moving, so you can pretend that you're actually there and listening to what the people are saying. So be
Yep.
careful your kids aren't buying that on Amazon.
Yep. Yeah. Listen, modern technology, you got to evolve, right? We got to be with it. So it is what it is.
Well, you mentioned California. Let's start at the very beginning of your
Uh,
timeline then. So tell me where you were born and tell me a little bit about your family dynamic, what your parents did, how many siblings.
Okay, so born and raised in California in Van Nuys mostly, which is the Valley. And I don't know, for a certain group of people who are around my age, we remember the concept of a Valley girl, which I was a Valley girl. And we used to say things like, oh my God, and gag me with a spoon. And I literally said those things. I'm so embarrassed now. Actually, I'm not. Who cares? It was funny. It is what it is. So I was raised there and went to school there, went to college there, university. And then I was raised by two first responders, actually. My mother was an ER nurse at a trauma center in Burbank, California. In fact, she started the trauma unit. It was like one of the first trauma units in LA that they would bring, you know, the major trauma cases to, and she was head nurse of the ER there. And my father was an LA County firefighter and paramedic. So we hit all the marks with first responder work and living in constant chaos and emergency. I have four siblings, one older who is my father and my mother's daughter with myself, and then three younger that are my bonus mother and my father's children. And so there are four girls total in our family. My father always used to say that he one time wished to be surrounded by women, and he got two ex-wives, a wife, and four daughters. And he was like, that's not what I meant. But whatever, it is what it is. And they all live in California currently. I'm the only one who kind of moved out, and I worked in technology for years and lived in California doing high tech startups, and then eventually made my way across the country to Washington, D.C., where I met my husband, and we stayed here and have been raising a family since. And I've been here for about 20 years, maybe 23.
When I first moved to America, I lived in Burbank for a while,
Oh,
so
you
I'm very
did.
familiar with Van Nuys. So, whereabouts was the hospital?
So it's called St. Joseph's Medical Center, and it was right by the studios. So right there by all the studios. Is that where you lived, by the studios?
Yeah, well, I was up. Basically, the planes that landed at Burbank Airport kind of hit the roofs of where we were living, so it was a
Yeah,
perfect, like, we were in a shoebox, like part of a house. And if you look at any, I just moved to LA, story in Hollywood, basically that's where we were living.
that's yeah, yep. That's the classic scenario.
So
Did you
first,
work? Were you in the entertainment space? Is that why you were living in Burbank?
so funnily enough, I actually got hired for Anaheim Fire Department, but my
Oh,
ex wanted to be famous. That
oh, well,
more
that
than
worked.
anything, she just wanted to be famous. So, we went there, kind of like starry eyed. She was wanting to go to Hollywood, but there wasn't really an actionable plan that went with it. So, but we stayed there for 3.5 years. So I worked for Anaheim just about 3.5, but lived in
Yeah.
Burbank initially, moved down to Huntington Beach to be closer to Anaheim. But yeah, it was an experience. I mean, I think everyone should live in LA once.
So wait, so what did you work? Were you LA City? Is that LA City Fire? What is that?
No, Anaheim Fire Department. So
Oh,
down.
and but that's not in LS. Yeah, okay. So my dad worked LA County, and there was always the running joke of it's like LA County versus LA City, and it was like cunny or shitty.
How are your family doing during the fires at the moment? Are they all okay?
Oh, it's messy. It's messy. One of my sisters who lived in LA, when I still spend a lot of time in California, I never really moved, and so we still have a house there. And so she's now in my house. She moved from LA to a safer grounds, and most of my family's now in like the Manhattan Beach area. And if things keep getting worse, they'll travel down more to Mesa with one of my other sisters. So far, it's okay, but it's just, I feel for all the firefighters and emergency personnel and all the people who've lost their homes. It's a shit show right now. I mean, literally, it's like Los Angeles is burning down.
Hmm. Well, we had the Paradise Fire a few years ago, and I had the dispatcher from that. That was an extremely powerful conversation because you
Oh,
imagine,
God.
that feeling of just, being unable to save anyone, and she's literally listening to them take their last breath before the fire comes in and, takes over their home. But this is the problem, and I've had a lot of people on the wildland side on the show as well. There are some things that you can do to lessen the chance of people, of homes, getting in the way, but there's a lot of opposition that people don't realize. The prescribed burns or not allowing people to burn in certain areas.
Ugh,
And so a lot of my wildland friends are just like, yeah, this is what happens when you push against the things that we need to do. And even the U.S. Forest Service and all the federal firefighters, they're woefully underfunded, understaffed. And yet, obviously when something like this happens, everyone's screaming for them. Well, this is the issue, and I'm sure we'll get into it. If you don't support your
yeah.
first responders all the time, when you absolutely need them, they may not be able to be as effective as they should be because of that lack of support.
Yeah, and you touched on something that I work with a lot, which is this. So it's like firefighters, paramedics, dispatch all kind of have the same feeling. It's like you're working, either you're on the phone with someone and you can't save them and there's no closure, or you're on the phone with someone, they're in a bad way. Paramedics come, take them to the hospital. You never know what's going on. There's no closure. As a paramedic, you drop them off at the hospital. You never know what happens to this person. And it's something that so many people are affected by. It just this left with this unknowing resolve and not knowing what to do with these emotions. And I mean, there's so much sleep deprivation. There's so much I want to talk about, but so much sleep deprivation in first responders. And it's because you're just sitting there at night, this poor person that you were talking to, just having to listen to someone who's dying in their home and knowing you can't help them. That's horrifying.
Absolutely. Well, getting to your parents, I think that's interesting, kind
Yeah.
of, your lens as a young girl versus what
Yeah.
you saw when they were working. Your mom first, when you unpack, or she even unpacks her career with the 2025 lens, what were the highs, what were the beautiful moments that she's talked about in that nursing role, and then what were some of the costs of her service?
Yeah. So let's talk about the cost first so we can end on a happy note. But, the costs for her were great. And there was a lot of emotional dysregulation that didn't have a name and didn't have a way of coping with. We have all these great tools to train people to do their jobs, to do heart massages and to do CPR and to fire a weapon. And we don't have any training on how to manage the associated trauma and outcome of these situations. And for her, that looked like, you know, a lot of depression and a lot of sadness. And she was an amazing woman. I mean, she's such a still she sits on the VAT team now for the police department in Manhattan Beach, and she's like 83, and they call her and they're like, oh, we need you to come out to a call. She's like, I'm on my way. She's a badass, but she did suffer from tremendous amounts of depression and sadness, and she would just get down. And being home at night and seeing her just kind of go retreat into her bedroom and just close the door, and you could hear her crying down the hall. And a lot of it surrounded child abuse and child violence, and lives she couldn't save, and family. She had to interface with public all the time and tell loved ones that their child has died or their spouse, and it takes a toll. And for her, I mean, she would show up, but also on top of that, I lived with my mom. My mom raised us. My mom and dad got divorced when I was 2. And so we were predominantly raised by my mother. I was with my father a lot, but predominantly with my mother. She was working 12-hour shifts. I mean, she's working 12-hour shifts as a single mother. Like we were shipped from here to there on our own, latchkey kids, all that. But she did what she had to do to raise her family, but it took a toll. And we would see it, and we would know when to stay clear and know when, oh, mom's sad, don't talk to her right now. But the good side is that she has tremendous, I mean, her empathy and her sympathy is huge. She has tremendous care for people. She transitioned from like the ER to the ICU to then to home health care, and she's just always been on the helping side. And the amount of, I mean, it's sad, the amount of funerals she's been to is insane, but the amount of people that want her at their funeral, I mean, she has changed the course of people's lives. She has helped them, being there for them, sit by their sides. The amount of lives that she's actually saved is, I mean, you can't even count the amount of lives she saved. And just like with every other first responder, she frames it like a lot of these tragedies, you kind of have to laugh at it, right? We have this sick sense of humor in this industry where we laugh at the things that most people would be like, that's gross, from, sitting there and cracking some guy's chest open and massaging his heart and blood going all over her face. And she's like, I don't know, I was massaging his heart. And I was like, spit or swallow. I swallowed. It's like you have to laugh at these moments or else you really go down the rat hole.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it sounds like she's had a journey then. So, I'm sure that when she was a young nurse, there was no discussion at all about, the mental health side. And it's interesting because if I reflect, the first conversations we were having is PTSD. And now as we progress forward, we realize that, yes, there's PTSD, but moral injury is probably more prominent, and especially with the inability to save, which I had 14 years in uniform. I never saved a single cardiac arrest. Pre-codes, yes, but when I went into cardiac arrest, the movie saves, 0. So you did everything that you were trained to do, and everyone still died. That's that's a weight as well. What have been the tools that have allowed her to process that and arguably forge this resilience where at 80 something years old, she's still, running out the front door?
So it's such an interesting question. I think there are some people that are predisposed to be able to do this. I think, though, a lot of times we look at like triggers as, oh, you're going to be triggered. And, it's like some of the things we do that might look bad are actually protective mechanisms. And I think that her view, being able to just kind of take things a little bit surfacey and not dive too deep, has protected her. she's not one to sit and super analyze things. I mean, an injury and something she has to do for work, yes, but in general, like, she's happy and go lucky, and I think so. There's this just personality trait in general that she had, and I mean, you could probably go back into her childhood and look why she chose to be on the surface of things and not dive deep and get carried away from them. But it was probably a negative thing to begin with, but it served her well for the job she was in. She's able to put things in a place and kind of put them in a bucket and leave them there and not go back and touch on them. But I will say also, she has had tremendous amount of therapy, and she, as an adult, went to therapy. And why? Because all of a sudden she just was suffering from depression. And what did the depression come from? It could have come from just she might have been depressed regardless of her job, or was it from her job? We won't know. But she did. She suffered from depression, and luckily was able to see some really great providers who have been treating her and giving her the proper medication. A lot of times we think like there's this weird stigma with being medicated if you have depression. And I don't feel that way. I feel like, no, it's a chemical imbalance. Let's right the course. So she has been able to, through therapy and through interventions like chemical interventions, been able to manage some of the stuff. But in general, she's just kind of that way. She's a little bit more like laissez faire.
It's interesting because when I look at my journey, I am literally no different than any other person wearing the uniform at the moment or prior. I'm no better, I'm no worse. I'm just a human being that chose to do this job. And so many people that had on the show, they were there. They were there with that pistol in their hand. Some of them jumped off the bridge and survived. And my question was, why not me? Why didn't I spiral down as deeply? And the only thing I can really come up with, which aligns with a lot of the holistic healing that we know now, is even though there was some pretty shitty things that happened when I was young, I grew up on a farm in England. So my dad was a veterinary surgeon. So we were around blood and guts. He was healing animals. There were people from extended royal family to gypsies cycling through the house. I was one of 5 kids. We always ate around a dinner table. We had, we laughed and joked. So just by winning the genetic lottery, as far as where I was born, I think there was this constant, coping mechanism infused to my childhood, even though I almost died in a house fire and my parents had a horrible divorce and some real traumas. And so it'll be interesting to see as your mum progressed through her early timeline, was there a similar thing that even though there were some bad things, were there other things infused that just organically gave them coping mechanisms, which is probably what happened, for most of history, tribally and beyond, until we got to this very technological age and this kind of ridiculous facade that, for example, talking about your mental health is weakness. So we were shoving all our emotions down, not talking about them.
So you brought up something so interesting, which was dinner table and sitting around. You always sat around the dinner table. And so I've been doing this, I don't know, for like, I don't even know how long, 15 years, something like that, mostly 10 years with first responders specifically, but before it included them. But anyway, what we used to see, and this is sad, the trend of suicide. Is it okay to talk about suicide and say suicide and things like
Absolutely.
that?
That's
Great.
how we fix it. 100%.
Yes. Okay. So we saw the trends of suicides are really interesting. And way back when, suicide rates among law enforcement were higher than suicide rates with fire services. And as of recent, like last 10 years, it's slowly been changing. And the last time I looked, fire services was higher than law enforcement, but that was last year. I don't know what the exact numbers are now, so someone can research it. But I find personally, and I would love if someone would do a study on this, a direct correlation. I think there's a direct correlation between dinner table talk, processing, and suicidal ideation. Way back when my father was a firefighter, we used to go, I was in the firehouses all the time. We'd sit around the table, everybody's making meals, you're having a meal together, everybody's talking shit, you're talking about the last call you went on, you're talking about, this funny thing happened, this tragic thing happened, and you're sitting around and you're processing. right? You're sharing what happened during the day. You're sharing with each other. You feel this idea of community, of connection. You all have the same goal. And then over time, we started using our iPhones, which they serve a purpose, but honestly, they're a fucking shit show, like so much else in this world. But I mean, I have an iPhone. I use it all the time. But now you have people in firehouses are off on their own. They're off on their own doing things, and they're not sitting around the table anymore as often processing. Some houses are doing it, some places are doing it. And I feel like there's such a correlation between being able to sit and just talk about shit and having things be okay. Right? Because we know when we talk about it, just like you said about the word suicide and talking about, so the more we talk about it, the more we normalize it, normalize the talking about it, and making it just more, more accessible. And it's not such a taboo. And I feel like that's one thing we're missing right now. And what never really law enforcement didn't have it to begin with, because they didn't have the 24-hour shifts, or 48 or 70, whatever. And so I think that's interesting to look at and to talk about, is just this idea of sitting down, like you had with your family, sitting down around a table and just talking. In my family, we sit down, we have dinner almost every night, and we say, and I'm not saying like I'm all that and I'm so great. It's just something we do. We sit down and we say, tell me the best part of your day, tell me the worst part of your day, and tell me a neutral part of your day. We just go around the table, and we get to talk about stuff. It brings stuff up.
Yeah. No, I mean, this is what I look back now. I mean, I had real food, we had fresh air, we had exercise, and it wasn't even working out. It was mucking out stables and herding sheep and all that stuff. But when you look at now, when a lot of these retreats that first responders and military members are going on, they're outside, they're talking to each other. There's exercise, there's fresh air, there's sunlight, there's dirt, there's animals. I mean, all the things that are infused. So, if you think about us a long time ago, the warriors that came home from war, you had those tribal ceremonies, and they would talk about what they did, or whether it was coming back from a hunt, or and stories are passed on from generation to generation, like which plants to eat, which plants not to eat. And we've just become so detached from that communal conversation that I think that's a big underlying element. And our poor kids that were born into this world, this generation, we wonder why there's a crisis in their mental health.
It is true. I was lucky enough to be brought into this amazing group of people. It's the Recon and Sniper Foundation. And they brought me in, and every year they take a group of veterans up to this ranch in Colorado called Rahway Ranch. I think I pronounced it right. Raywa, I don't know. And we go up there every year, and we take like 20 people, 20 veterans, and it's exactly that. We're outdoors. We're doing physical activity, whether it's riding horses or taking hikes or fly fishing, or we've just recently incorporated jujitsu, which is really fun. And and then all day long, I do therapeutic mindfulness with them. So one-on-one therapeutic mindfulness. And then there's a psychiatrist there. She does all the talk therapy. And then at the end of the day, we all get together and we sit around the table, and we just, for an hour or more, we're sitting there having a meal together, just talking smack. And it has all the components you just said. You're outdoors, you're around animals, you're doing an act. You're not just working out to work out. We get there before the ranch has their all the people that show up to rent places from them, and we clear fields. We clear trails. So we're out with chainsaws clearing all the debris away, and it's just like you're outdoors and working out just to be outdoors and working out. Not to like build muscle, but just to be in the outdoor elements. It's so cool. I agree. I wish our lives, I don't know, I don't think we could do it, but wouldn't it be cool if that was our life?
I mean, if you have one of those like EMF things that you hear about where it just kills every electronic device, and assuming that there was an infrastructure where people just didn't simply starve to death, it would be
Right.
interesting the impact that would have on mental
Yeah.
health if we had to just be out there growing and, hunting and foraging and all the things that we used to have to do. We'd have to cook around a fire. We'd probably be super sleepy by 8,
Yeah.
9 o'clock and go to bed.
Oh, before that.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it would be interesting as a social experiment.
Yeah, my family thinks I'm crazy because I'm like, one day I want to live on a commune. I want to sit and like everyone's going to have their own task, and I'm going to be responsible for X and you be responsible for Y, and we're all going to take care vegetables and goats and all. And I can't even like water a plant to save my life. Like I have no plants in my house. I am so bad at planting and gardening, but I feel like if I have nothing else to do, maybe I would do it.
Absolutely. Well, going, you talked about your mum. Just quickly touch
Yeah.
on your dad as well. Through your 2025 eyes now, what were the highs? What were the struggles when it came to his career?
So, first of all, my father died of a heart attack when he was 62. Um, which is really young. And I attribute it to just the high stress of his life and his job. And he had a lot of injuries working as a firefighter. He ended up working air ops for a while in LA and was the guy who like would hang out of helicopters and rescue people off the side of mountains. And he had knee injury and back injury and elbow injury. So he had a ton of injuries. And when he retired, he was on a lot of medication. Some of it was self medicated. And he loved basketball. And one day he was playing basketball on a pickup game while he was picking up one of my little sisters who was coming home from diabetes camp. And mind you, my stepmother had died 5 years previously from cancer at the age of like 45, which was way too young. And his daughters, my sisters at the time, were really young. So he also had that stress. But he goes out to play a pickup game and like drops dead on the basketball court, like in one fell swoop, dead. And I do really think that it was accumulative. I think it was accumulation of stress. Going back to way back when he was raised in an abusive environment. My mom was very like think about things in like the window of tolerance where you're hypervigilant or you're hypovigilant. And my mom was very hypovigilant. She pulled into herself when she was stressed out. She was very quiet. She would cry, depression. My dad was on the other side. He was hypervigilant, very angry, very active. I mean, holes were always in our walls, couches flipped, like the whole thing, right? He luckily didn't touch us much, but like physically, violently, but he sure did like inanimate objects. And I ended up liking those also. But so his father abused him. And so I know that that's where it came from. So I don't think all of it is to say it's from fire services. But then once he got on the job, he was really sensitive and he worked really hard to not be violent. Uh, but he had this side of him that really resonated with children. And he had an enormous amount of child deaths on duty that he witnessed and was a part of. And every single time he was just crushed. Like he couldn't function. And it was so sad to watch and so hard to watch and as a child to watch because you don't really understand it. But I remember one time there was a little boy who was at a pool, maybe like 2 or 3, and he sat down. I don't even know how this happened, but like outside of a pool, there's that external drain, and it has a suction on it, and he sat on it, and somehow it suctioned him to it, and just pulled a lot of stuff out that it shouldn't. And my dad was there, brought him, helped him, brought him to the hospital. The poor child ended up dying, but my dad was at that hospital for a week. He would go there every single day and just sit with this kid and feel the pain of not being able to help and feeling like you were saying it in the beginning. It's, this moral injury of, once the shit hit the fan, you were trying CPR, they were gone. You couldn't bring them back. And just that pain that I saw him numerous times, way too many than someone should deal with, try and work through this. And it really took a toll on him. Now, the other side of it, my dad was like hysterical, amazing sense of humor. I mean, constantly playing jokes on us. I can't, the guy, you would just walk down the hall and all of a sudden you'd see his head sticking out like on the floor. He'd be lying sideways, being like, surprise, just weird shit. So he had this other side of him that made him resilient, that made him enjoy life and have fun. He didn't drink. he just kind of enjoyed life. But there was the dark side, and it was dark, and it was ugly, and it was sad.
This is, I think, one of the two areas that aren't discussed when it comes to mental health in first responders. I mean, they are by some, the really passionate ones, but the general conversation is there's a disregarding of sleep deprivation, which I know we're going to get to, which is a huge, as I say, herd of elephants in the room. But then also what happened to us before we put the uniform on, from in vitro through to you get the badge pinned on. We've had a life. And more often than not, if you look at ACEs scores of first responders,
Uh,
most of us have, some significant things that have happened, which I would say, if addressed, becomes absolutely a strength. But if left unaddressed and shoved
yes,
down, fractures the
agree.
foundation. And it would, if I'm playing white belt psychologist, if your dad was hurt as a child, subconsciously his mission was to protect children, which is probably why
Yes,
he was so crushed when he couldn't.
right. I'm right there with you. Like, I'm not a doctor, I'm not a psychologist, but I feel the exact same way. Also, I see that a lot of people who put themselves in jobs and that are filled with like high energy and danger, oftentimes I've noticed a correlation, like you're saying, with childhood, and whether it's to right a wrong, or it's because people have become desensitized to pain. I think it's worth something. It's worth looking at, because a lot of times, if you live in constant chronic chaos and pain, your threshold is different. And when you are engaging in the world, in order to feel anything, it has to be dangerous, because you've felt so much pain your whole life and so much suffering your whole life. That's your homeostasis. You're just used to that. That's normal. And so, in order to feel anything, sometimes it has to be above that threshold. And that's where danger comes in. And that's why being attracted to dangerous jobs and dangerous behavior is really attractive, because it enables people to feel something who normally can't.
Yeah, I think the other element that I've heard people, mention as far as when they kind of started spiraling downwards was when it wasn't exciting anymore. So there's almost like this element. You see this with, what we affectionately refer to as the overtime whores, that they just take every hour they can. And it's like, you've got a family at home. Why don't you want to go home? But busyness is another under recognized symptom of mental health challenges. If you cannot just sit with your thoughts, that's a huge red flag. If you have to be busy, and the problem with the first responder profession is, just like you said, once we hit 8-10 years ish, a fire isn't a fire anymore. At 14 years, unless I had to fight my way to the front door, I didn't even call it a fire.
Right.
Whereas as a rookie, if a mattress is on fire, you're like, yeah, I had a ripper
Yeah.
today.
Yeah.
So when that becomes less exciting and or less busy, to distract
Right.
the mind from the thoughts that it wants to think about, that I think is why, a lot of the suicides and struggles that you see are people that are a little bit later in their life. And I think part of it
Right.
is exactly like you said, it's not as exciting and it's not therefore as distracting from the things that are simmering underneath.
Right. It's dysregulating. Calm is dysregulating, because chaos is the norm. Your system is used to being revved up. It's used to being in emergency mode. And the second you take that away, it's like that's all of a sudden uncomfortable. Being calm and just copacetic is uncomfortable and dysregulating, and that's fucked up, right? Like, at the least, that is, it's really disheartening. And then, yeah, it's like, we also, I've it just made me thought about the concept of purpose, right? It's when you talk about it happens later on in life, and a lot of time after retirement, it's all of a sudden your whole entire identity, who you are and what you do and how you show up in the world, is gone. And I mean, we should have reentry programs. We should have, I know some places do, but it should be mandatory part of the job, is like, what happens after retirement? What do you do? Finding something, finding purpose. Because without it, I feel like that leads to a lot of suicides.
Yeah, 100%. And we just get
Yeah,
stuck, especially the men of my generation. I've talked about this a lot. You got the yin and the yang. The black is the soft and compassionate, and the white is the hard. And on a structure fire, on an extrication, yeah, you can lean into the operational side, the white, but through this kind of faux stoicism that the Schwarzeneggers and Stallones gave us when we were younger, these men become a white circle, especially men. I'm sure it happens in the women, but I think more so in the men. And so then they become, I'm a Marine, I'm a firefighter. And then you come out the
right.
other end and then you fall apart. But what
Yeah,
they failed to recognize is it was the other side, the black side, that was the compassion and empathy that sent you into that job in the first place. And your dad's a perfect
yeah,
example of that. So
yeah.
realizing that you can serve in a different capacity and allow yourself that compassion and empathy, that's actually what a man is, not a white circle, but the yin and the yang.
I mean, that's really, I resonate with that a lot. And somehow there is just so much pushback on compassion and empathy, and and it's making me weak. And there are a place for both. You can hold both at the same time. You can actually hold the yin and the yang at the same time, right? You can be both at the same time, and oftentimes we think that you have to be one or the other, and it's divisive. And I think some of this training that we could do is to show that you can still be sad and show up for your children. Like you could still be upset about something and still be able to navigate the world. You don't have to shove it down and have it, and ignore it and not be there. And the second we open up to it and say, okay, I need to feel an emotion and let me feel like what sad feels like, all of a sudden it's not the white elephant in the room. And all of a sudden you're not thinking about it, not thinking about it, not thinking about it. It's there, and it gives you space to think about something else. And I think that's really important. And it's one of the things that, I was thinking about this the other day, about this concept of suck it up. And so many people in law enforcement and fire services and so many of these helping professions, it's like, you suck it up. You can't feel your emotion. You got to suck it up. And I remember one time, when I was like, I don't know, I was maybe 7 or 8, and my dad was teaching me how to do a backflip off the diving board. And it took me a little while, but I finally got it. And he's like, okay, you got to do it over and over again now. So I did it over, backflip, backflip. And then I started getting a little cocky, and I'm like, oh, I'm going to jump even higher this time. So I jumped really high, and I was thinking, ooh, if I could do like 1.5, wouldn't that be cool? Anyway, I went up, and when I came back down, I didn't jump out. I just went straight up, and I came down and I hit my head on the board, and I just kind of fell into the water, fell all the way down to the deep end. I remember like looking up and seeing my dad's arm trying to reach down. And I'm like, just fucking get in the pool. Like, why are you sticking your arm down there? But anyway, I swam up to the top and I got out, and I was like, oh, and my head is like a big knot and I'm crying. And he's like, okay, get back on and do it again. And I was like, no, Dad, I can't. And he's like, you got to just suck it up and do it. And I was like, what an asshole. And I got up and I did it again, and fine, I landed it. And, the second I did it again, I got out of the pool and I went in the house. And for years, I was so mad at him. I was like, what a jerk, suck it up, suck it up. And that was his like mentality towards so many things, was you just have to suck it up. And later on in life, upon reflecting, there is a place for sucking it up. You sometimes do have to suck it up in order to take care of the task at hand, in order to get the job done, in order to do what you need to do. And then you can feel your emotions. It's not to say that suck it up is like a 1 or a 0. I feel like suck it up, it has a place. It has a place sometimes. But if we then lay it over absolutely every part of our life, that's when we get into problems. When we have like these absolutes and these black and whites versus the black and white yin and yang thing, but like put everything in a black and white box. All of a sudden, we have problems addressing what needs to be addressed. Instead, if we can say, okay, let's suck it up momentarily so we can take care of what needs to be taken care of, right? As a first responder, if you get carried away by your emotion in the moment of a tragedy, you're not going to be effective as your job at your job. Like that's just it's impossible, right? So you have to put it in a box and be like, okay, I'm going to get back to you. And then get back to it and go, okay, now I need to make some space to feel the shit that I felt so I don't feel like such crap. But I do believe we should sometimes suck it up.
Yeah. I mean, operationally, absolutely. If you got to go over the edge of a building on a rope, that's not the
Yeah,
time to be screaming like a little girl and saying, I don't like heights.
no.
But if you then rappel down and God forbid you're retrieving a child who's deceased, then that's when you're going to have to process that because that's
Yep.
a completely different part of the psyche then.
Yeah. Yes.
All right. Well, I want to get back to your journey into mindfulness. So
Yeah.
you're in high school, you're saying, oh my God, Becky, look at that butt and all the other Valley Girl stuff that you guys say. Um,
Gag me with a spoon.
so what was your initial career aspiration and how did you find yourself in the world of mindfulness? Not only just mindfulness, but actually academically studying mindfulness.
Yeah. So, I mean, of course, like every other person in Los Angeles, I was going to be a movie star. No, it was very brief. It didn't last long, but I did like theater work and stuff like that. So, when I eventually went to university, so my father was a firefighter, mother was a registered nurse. Neither of them went to a formal university, right? They both got their certifications and their degrees in nursing and in fire services. Um, so I there was not a lot of focus on education and going to university. It was never a lot of conversation in our family. And it was just like, oh, yeah, do what you want to do. So I ended up in community college for about 6 years and then eventually transferred to a UC. And I am essentially was the first person in our family to have a formal college education. And while I was in school, I was part of the speech team and ended up going to like nationals and winning gold championships for speech, not the debate side of speech, but there's like pros and all sorts of other sides of speech team. So, and I found this great love in speech and I started to focus on communications as a major. So I focused on communications and I initially got into public relations, which I thought, I don't know, kind of marketing, people centric. I could talk to people. Let me try that. I ended up in in technology. And so I was kind of during that technology 90s boom where, startups were really cool and manageable. And so I did that for years and really enjoyed it. And I eventually moved to DC. I started my own consulting firm after a company that I was at sold to another company. And I got some contracts in DC, moved to DC, where I met my husband. And so fast forward, we started raising children, and I started noticing that my level of frustration and the way I showed up for my children was getting ugly. And I was still working in technology, but I started noticing with my first two children, they were my husband's kids from his first marriage. And so I was a little bit more reserved with them, even though we had them half the time. I was more reserved because they had a mother and I deferred to her on everything. Like she was the mom. They call me Nina. I'm their Nina. And but when we eventually had our own, our youngest, kind of like something else inside me opened and I didn't have to reserve. And so the ugly side of me came out that I didn't know was there. And I found that when my daughter was 4, I really was aggressive towards her one day in a way that's not acceptable. And I just had this epiphany of like, what the fuck am I doing? This is not okay. And why am I doing this? And do I have control over this? Obviously not. Why don't I have control? that doesn't make sense. I should be able to control my actions. And so I started to study the brain. I was really curious. I went back to school and I was like, I want to understand the stress response. I want to understand what part of our brain reacts during stress, what part of our brain is connected to trauma, what part of our brain do we have control of, what part of our brain don't we, and can we actually train for control? Like, is that a thing? So I started looking at neuroscience and the stress response system, and I fell into mindfulness. And mindfulness is really interesting because it's an actual training that you do where you train your brain to think. It's all about awareness. It's not like it's not like the talk therapy of, how did my childhood fuck me up to this point in life? It's like, I'm here right now. What am I feeling? And what can I do about it? And so I started just studying it more and more and more, which is kind of like why I named my company Mindful Junkie, because once I fell, like some friends of mine actually said, oh, this would be the perfect name for you once they saw what I was doing, which was just, I felt like a junkie. I was consuming more and more mindfulness, getting mindfulness certified, getting teacher certified, going to school, like all these things. I'm like, give me more, give me more, give me more. And eventually got into a master's program, which was the very first mindfulness master's degree you could get in the United States. It might even be the only one still. I don't know. But I was like one of the first 10 graduates of this mindfulness master's program. And while I conducted the study and was writing my thesis, and all my research was honing in on first responders. And I was looking at it because I was interested in the stress response system and I was interested in chronic stress, right? So, like, everybody has stress, but then there's chronic stress, and chronic stress says it's pervasive, it's just happening all the time. And the life of a first responder, I mean, your entire job is stress. Like, it's just like, the trauma, the tragedy. And so I was looking at all of this, and I was I think I mentioned this once when we were talking before, but this lieutenant once said to me, he's like, "Why are you so interested in first responders?" And I was like, "I don't know. They're just really cool people, badass people who want to take care of the world, and no one's taking care of them. So why don't we figure out something to take care of them?" And I was like, indignantly told my husband, I'm like, this jerk was like, "Why first responders?" And Jeff, my husband, finally pointed out that no, I was raised by two first responders, and that's why my lens is such. And I didn't get it at the time, but now, like, while I was doing it, but now I realize, I mean, that was my lens. My lens was seeing two people who were so amazing, taking care of our community at a cost to themselves, at a cost to our family. When the doors closed at the end of the night, for us, it was a lot of pain and suffering. And yet they were out there in the world every single day, taking care of our community, taking care of others. And no one was saying, who's taking care of the people who are taking care of the people? What resources do we have? And so when I started asking all these questions during my study and during my thesis and writing all of this, like, what training do you have to help you process? What trainings do you have to prepare you to go into a traumatic moment? What trainings do you have when you leave work at the end of the night before getting home? How do you learn to regulate? Like, what trainings do you have to show up in the world, to show up for your family? And I just kept getting a whole lot of nothing, 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 nothing. And so I started looking at mindfulness as a way of going, okay, we can do this. We can train just like we do a muscle. We can train our brain to identify being triggered, identify a stress state, identify trauma, even identify happiness, identify joy, identify gratitude. And we can train to magnify it or to dim the light on it. And so I just, after I wrote my thesis, was like the backbone for the curriculum. I developed a curriculum called Tactical Brain Training, and I go in and I train in departments and agencies. It's a 4-hour course, and it's the psychoeducation of stress and trauma. So all the interventions for stress and trauma, and you apply mindfulness throughout, mindfulness interventions. And one of the things that I think is a huge misconception with mindfulness, but also with stress management in general, is that there's a fix. There's one thing you can do, when the reality is everybody's trauma is personal. Everybody's stress is personal. Everything that brought you to this moment is personal. And so are the interventions you're going to use for helping to de stress. What works for me might not work for you. What works for you might not work for Joe. And so part of this training that I do is to help identify a personal strategy to say, okay, maybe I hate square breathing because it makes me claustrophobic. So I'm not going to use that to regulate, but I'm going to use a listening intervention. And maybe if I do this listening intervention right now, it'll take me out of my amygdala, fight, flight, and freeze, and into my prefrontal cortex, where I can start actively making decisions, and I can get out of ruminating, I can get out of self-judgment and start thinking. And so it provides like 15 different opportunities and mindfulness interventions to help you establish what works for you and create like a personal system. And I started teaching it.
So what were you seeing in that community when you first started teaching it, especially as far as the resistance, and what has been the kind of metamorphosis since then?
That's such a good question. Okay, so when I first started teaching it, I called it Mindfulness for First Responders. That was like, no go, slam the door in the face. This ain't happening. Crazy lady with the mohawk is coming in to talk to a bunch of fucking first responders. This shit ain't flying. They expected me to be burning incense and wearing Lululemon leggings and sitting on the mat and breathing. And I don't resonate with that. So that's not how I show up, because that never worked for me. So I didn't do it. I mean, a lot of this is like cultural competency we talk about. And, you know, I have the cultural competency only because it's what I resonate with. And I was raised in the environment of first responders. There are many different ways of getting there. This is just my approach. So I was getting a lot of rejects, a lot of no's, I started with mindfulness for first responders, and I started with a very tried and true course, which was like an 8-week intervention. Okay. No one can give me 8 weeks. An agency, a department, no one, 8 weeks is like impossible, especially with shift work. It's like, to get everybody in 8 weeks to learn something, it doesn't work. Pared it down to 6 weeks. Let me try 6 weeks. No go. Pared it down to 4 weeks. No go. So I realized that it has to be a planting of a seed. It can't be an entire training. It has to be, let's start planting the seed of what mindfulness is, so that you can then take it and grow it into what you want it to be. And then I had to, when our nervous system is all revved up with like mirror neurons, with mirror neurons, you show up and you're like angry and the person gets angry, right? Like the mood you're in really seeps onto the other person's mood. And if you're threatened, people feel threatened. Well, I was noticing that the word mindfulness negatively impacted the nervous system of people. And so rather than creating an insurmountable situation to begin with, why not just change the name of it so that I don't walk in and they're already pissed off at me? Make it something that manages somebody's nervous system, so I can come in and we can start talking about this shit. And so years later, I named it Tactical Brain Training. And that's when I started seeing way more interaction and way more interest. And it's not a lie. You could say it's marketing, but it's marketing to the extent of creating it. It's like people are more open to it. And it is what it is. You're tactically training your brain to identify stress, identify trauma, and then do something about it. And so that was like the progression. And then it became a 4-hour training that's a planting of a seed. And it's specifically called Tactical Brain Training because you're training your brain to think.
It's interesting. It's the same thing that I came across. I mean, not too long ago, way after you had this conversation with yourself, but when there's resistance to using the tools that we know work when it comes to mental health, having the performance conversation results in the same exact thing, but you've reframed it. So you get, a firefighter or a police officer's like, oh, that's just hippy dippy bullshit. But they're on the
Yes.
SWAT team or they're one of the
Yes.
rescue guys. It's like, all right, then, rock star.
Yeah.
Do you know that you cannot get into flow state with a busy mind? So if you really want to be at that top operator level as a firefighter or a paramedic or whatever it is, then these are the tools that the elite athletes use so they can get into a flow state, so they
Yes.
can be present. So when you're
Yes.
searching a room and it's all smoked out, that you can actually see that layout of the room as you're feeling with your hand versus, two corners in, you start panicking because you got lost. So I
Yeah.
like that
Yes.
reframing because the result is exactly the same. You're trying to calm the nervous
Yes.
system, you're trying to clear the mind, but the operational side is also a good hook for the naysayers.
Yeah. And it's like, instead of trying to I don't know, I screw up these sayings all the time, but what is it? You're like trying to put a square peg in a round hole or a round peg in a square hole. I don't know, whichever one it is. It's like, instead of trying to do that, we're like trying to shove, we're like, mindfulness, mindfulness. And it's like, no, no, no. Why? Why not just change it? Why not just reframe it and make it so that people want to do it? Right? It's like, I'm, one of the things that I have found over and over again is you have to show up where people are, not where you want them to be. And rather than trying to say, I want you to be here, I just offer up ideas, and everything is also an option. One of the, what I teach is a very trauma aware mindfulness, which says that you don't have to sit with your eyes closed and have no thoughts and focus on, it's all about options. It's like, do you want to close your eyes? Great. If you don't, fuck it. Don't close your eyes. You don't have to. If you want to stand the whole time, stand. If you want to lean back in your chair, lean back. Do it that it's going to work for you. Don't do it in the way that we've created the system that you must comply to.
Absolutely. Well, you mentioned about the punctuation of shifts. I've had a guy, Jim Poole, on, and he's from a company called Newcalm. I don't know if you ever heard of them.
Yeah.
Nucalm. It would
Oh,
absolutely go hand in hand with what you do.
I'll look them up.
The quick backstory, I'm sure people listening have heard it before, but this technology came from this incredible scientist that we had in the US who took 15 years to figure out the frequency that the brain is at in certain emotional states.
Okay.
And he then took another 10 years to figure out, well, can we influence the brain to go into those states? And he
Okay.
came up with this device, and you put headphones on, and it's not the kind of neuro beats that you can get on a Spotify playlist. Each song is like a gig's worth of stuff. So under the music are all these kind of undulations, and it's the only one in the world that has the patent for this particular technology. And it used to be in the NASA, training rooms and the SEAL rooms and, NFL locker rooms, big
Yeah.
$6,000 box that they had. Well, now, as we touched on earlier, the technology that we have in our phones, it's an app. And so I cannot speak highly enough of this. And the same with mindfulness. I've used Headspace for years, but it's passive. So like you said, trying to get the thoughts to go away, I
Yeah.
think it's also a good gateway drug into mindfulness too. But so what I've said to a lot of people on the show is find somewhere safe, because obviously you can't relax unless you feel safe. So go back in the bunk room when you've been relieved, or sit in your patrol car, but within the perimeter of your station or whatever it is that you go to for meetings. Put on the eye mask and the headphones and do the 20-minute power nap. And what it does is it whether you like it or not, it will down regulate your nervous system. And I can't think of aside from mindfulness, a better way of punctuating between I just cut a kid out of a car at 3 a.m. and I'm dad walking through the door at 9. So talk to me. I mean, that's that technology, but I mean, mindfulness, again, doing a headspace session or the things that you're going to teach. I think we need a punctuation between work and home. So talk to me about that space.
Yeah. So first of all, Newcom, I feel like might be my new best friend. I am going to research the shit out of it as soon as we're off of this. I can't wait. I know that there's tons of research with sound and brainwaves and how it all works. I don't know anything about it. I just know that it's out there. And I know there's also something called heart math, which is It's like a little, I wonder if I have it on me. It's like this little device you put on your ear, and it follows your heart rate, and then you look on your phone and you take the ball and you either try and keep, it's biofeedback. I don't know if you've ever done biofeedback. I did it way back when I was a kid. But anyway, it's a really great way of regulating and keeping you on track. And it's a great way of practicing mindfulness, where it really is mindfulness. You're focusing on something, and when you get distracted, you know you're getting distracted. So you come back to being focused, which is what it is. But it's also another great way of getting there. And this does speak to this feeling that I have so much, which is there's not one access point to all of this. There are so many different access points to creating, being able to manage, down regulating, and being able to manage the tragedy, right? There's Newcom, there's heart math, there's mindfulness, there's all, like, it behooves us to talk about them all and to not be adamant that one is the only way to go. There's a shit ton. So anyway, so one of the things is, mindfulness is great. It's preventative. It's great for before you encounter a tragic situation, during the moment of, but also afterwards when you're trying to downregulate, as you mentioned. Um, Part of the mindfulness practice itself is just, you have to first notice that you're in a moment where you need to do it. And after practicing over time, that's when you start noticing that you feel out of your window of tolerance. You feel hyper or hypovigilant. You're not feeling copacetic. You're not feeling like things are okay. You feel uncomfortable. Then once you notice that discomfort, then you could do something about it. So a lot of times, even it could be something as simple as when you're driving back from an incident, to actually tune into a sensation. So you can notice like the feeling of the steering wheel. All of a sudden you start having thoughts of the situation you just went through, and you go, oh, I'm thinking, and you redirect and go back to a sensation. I'm going to feel the steering wheel. I'm going to feel the door. I'm going to, listening. A lot of times I recommend listening to music. Music, like we were just saying, sound is a great soother. It's a great way to focus on something else. And it's not to disappear what has occurred. It's not to say, I'm not going to think about this. It's more to say, I'm feeling heightened. The way I'm thinking about it is dysregulating. And so I'm going to refocus on something else. We should be able to sit with our feelings and with our emotions, but we have to do it in a safe way. We have to do it in a way that isn't going to take us and spiral us down. And so there's a way of doing that where you can sit and what does this feel like? This is sadness, and name it, right? So there's a thing, it's name it to tame it. I'm sure you've heard of that saying before. It's very neurologically based. Neurons that fire together, wire together, name it to tame it. When you can name something, you somehow take some of its power away, right? So in the moment when you're feeling sad, notice this is sadness. And there's a specific mindfulness intervention that you could do where, rather than identifying with it and saying, I am sad, I am angry, instead you say, this is sadness, this is anger. Because who I am is Gina. I am not sadness. I am not frustration. I am not anger. I am Gina. But this feeling I have, this feels like sadness. This is sadness. This is pain. And then once you name it, you go, okay, what can I do to redirect? So you name it. This is sadness. Take a breath. We know through a lot of research that actual breathing helps to decrease cortisol overload. Cortisol is the stress hormone. A lot of times it's in our systems, whether we want it or not. We're living in high stress. Everything goes. You're just like in stress and hormones and cortisol. And just taking a breath helps to decrease the cortisol levels in our system. So it's not like you're just taking a breath. Oh, you need to calm down and take a breath. You're actually doing something physiologically to your body. But you have to remember to take a breath. And that's another component of mindfulness. Remembering to do something. I need to remember to take a breath. And we know also through science and through wonderful books like Breathe or Breath, I can't remember which one it is, that we have two different chambers in our lungs, and it's like the lower chamber, the deep, deep breath we take, that is connected to our nervous system. And so the deeper the breath, the more you're going to be able to down regulate. So you have stress, you name it, you feel a sensation, take some deep breaths. Yes, this is sadness. Okay, now what? And then you carry on.
I used to use breath work on the way to acute calls. So obviously there's a lot of calls that are very run of the mill. It doesn't even get your heart rate up at
Yep.
all. But then you get that pediatric call or confirmed
Yes.
structure fire. And it wasn't really box breathing so much. It was probably, again, just a slow inhale, slow exhale. But it was amazing how it would just keep it down, because you're not trying to be in some, sleep state on the way to a call. You got to have that level of performance.
Yeah.
But just to take the edge off it where it doesn't become overwhelming.
Yeah. And, you mentioned box breathing. Some people call it square breathing. Some people call it box breathing. It's amazing. In all these, every single time I do a training, I do box breathing, square breathing, I do open breathing, I do a shit ton of other things. But between square breathing and open breathing, at the end, I have them raise their hands, who preferred square breathing, who preferred open breath. It's almost half and half. And the people who don't like square breathing feel like they're holding their breath. They feel claustrophobic. They feel like they can't breathe. The people who don't like open breathing feel like it's never ending and they can't stop thinking, and their thoughts just keep going and going and going. And so, again, one is not right. It's find what works for you and do that.
So for people listening, if they took the course, what would the kind of principles be that are infused in that?
Learning to identify what's occurring while it's occurring, so you have agency over your actions. A lot of times we are just in a reactive state, and a reactive state takes you to the amygdala, to the fight, flight, and freeze. A responsive state is prefrontal cortex, executive functioning. So you're learning about the science behind the prefrontal cortex, the amygdala, the science behind the stress response system, your adrenal glands, your cortisol overload, the science behind ruminating, having thoughts that just keep spinning out of control. But while you're doing that, the entire time, you're practicing an intervention. And this is kind of how my book flows also. It's like there's some science, and then you actually do a practice. So I'm not just throwing stuff at you saying, oh, here's all these wonderful ideas. We're in class in the moment going to practice this shit. So you do some practice, and then you learn some more science, and then you do some practice, and you assess over and over and over again. One of the main principles is self-assessment. You assess what you're like before you do an intervention. You assess what you're like after an intervention. And did you like it? Like maybe you hated it. Great. Don't do it. Don't do the one you hate when you're feeling really bad. That's going to suck. And then through the whole thing, it's science, practice, assessment, science, practice, assessment. So at the end of it, when you're done, you have a list of things that work, a list of things that don't work, and then you could start developing your own program. And one of the things that's in my book is I was able to convince the publisher to put QR codes at the end of each chapter, so that at the end of each chapter, you can go on and do a guided meditation. Like it takes you to my YouTube channel where they can do an actual guided meditation on their phone or on their computer.
Brilliant. I forget who it was. Someone recently said they wanted to do that I think it was one of my English chiropractic friends, actually. I thought it was just such a brilliant idea because, there's text and you can absorb a lot, but there's certainly times where, like, how do you describe a Turkish getup, for example?
Yes.
It's really hard to do with words or
Yes.
even pictures. But yeah, so
Yeah.
now you go to a video, and then I think the guided meditation is fantastic. My wife gets a little bit of anxiety, and she'll just do literally, I don't even know if it's a minute, the headspace breathing. I think it's 5 breaths, and it's a bird or a balloon or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And within that, literally 60 seconds or so, she's kind of down regulated again, and she's good to go. So yeah, it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, and I think like that's it too, right there. It's like just be curious, like try it out. What see if it works. Try it for 2 weeks. Just do one of the misconceptions is that you have to do a seated meditation for an hour a day, and it's bullshit. They have shown such high efficacy with 12 minutes a day. 12 minutes. Even 5 minutes. Even like you said like 60 seconds for your wife or whatever it is. There's like just be curious and try it and see how it's showing up for you.
Absolutely. Well, you mentioned the book, Tactical Brain Training. So talk to me about what people will find in there aside from the QR codes.
So they'll find it's meant to be an interactive book. So it's each chapter is like a story. It's a first responder story. It starts with like an actual real life situation that occurred without having a mindfulness lens. And then it replays the scenario with a mindfulness lens. And then it has the science as to why. Why did this happen? Why did this occur? And then you also, each chapter has a contemplative question. Like you're right down, like it asks you a question. When was the last time you were triggered on the job? What does it look like for you to be an external stressor? How can you down regulate? Was this effective? So like literally in the book you can write, there's questions that you're writing answers to based on the previous learnings. And then there is the self assessment. So you can write down in the book, you can assess how each intervention works for you after you do the guided one that you can watch, or you can like listen to someone else. Maybe you hate my voice. Listen to someone else's guided meditation. That's totally fine. You could still go through the whole book. And so it's science, it's practice, it's like processing through questions, and then it's assessing.
Beautiful. Well, I want to get to where people can find that at the end, but just before we do, we
Yeah.
touched on sleep and sleep deprivation and shift work
Uh,
a little bit before. I'm just going to give you the microphone. Talk to me about what you see as far as my community and that issue.
it's a shit show. There, yeah, I mean, just to lay it out there, sleep deprivation is huge for a multitude of reasons. One, shift work. Shift work totally screws you up, right? Like it's hard. It's just really hard to be up all night and then stay awake when you get home to be there for your kids who you now have to make breakfast for, get them out the door, stay awake, and then you want to be awake when they get home. I mean, it's just really hard. Plus, when we lay down at night, it's really easy to go into judgment and to go into all the things you did wrong, all the things you wish you could have done throughout maybe that bad call and so it's really really difficult. We're all revved up, and I think that almost every single first responder I talk to has sleeping issues. There are so many different ways of helping with sleep, and it's really important. We know the science behind sleep. I don't have to go over all the studies, but it really messes up with your brain. It messes up with your nervous system. It messes up with your ability. You're cold. You get sick more often. Your immune system. I couldn't think of that word. I just did immune system. And so it has really negative effects on you when you don't have. Plus, you're just kind of mean. Like when I don't get enough sleep, I'm just not that nice. So at a basic level, you're just kind of mean. But there are some really great exercises you can do. A body scan is a great example of. You could literally sit there and listen to a guided meditation next to your bed on your iPhone. Sometimes phones are great, and listen to a meditation. And a body scan takes you progressively. It's like a progressive muscle relaxation. And you like relax your feet and your knees, and you go all the way up to your chest and your head, and then you go back down. And it's literally so boring, you fall asleep. You're like, that is so boring, I'm falling asleep. But there are so many different types of meditations you can listen to. And you can either put it on your phone and put a timer on your phone. Amazon has the most amazing headband that has speakers in it, wireless speakers. So for instance, if you share a bed with someone and they don't want to listen to what you're listening to, you can sleep with this headband on. It's like it's meant for sleeping, and you can listen to a guided meditation, a body scan, a listening, just white noise, dark noise. I mean, there's all sorts of noises you can listen to. And then you can also, like my husband, listen to the history of Rome and just fall asleep by listening to the history of Rome. But there are a lot of different ways. And they did this study once taking people who were intoxicated and people who had sleep deprivation, and they put them on a driving course. And they said, ready, set, go. And they put them through this driving course, and they both sucked and they both failed. And so when you think about, we are putting our lives in the hands of poor individuals who cannot sleep, and we're asking them to protect and to serve and to not get injured. And they literally are having a hard time thinking because of sleep deprivation. That's a problem. But then, not only that, what do we do? I'm working with someone right now who recently thought they were having a heart attack. Turns out they probably were. Has had to go to the hospital numerous times now. Sleep deprivation, Adderall, energy drinks. Over, repeat, rinse, repeat, rinse, repeat, rinse. They can't sleep. They have to have energy drinks. They have to take Adderall, and then they crash. And this is something we see a lot, especially night shift, especially, a lot of people who are working nights. You see this. And it's obviously a really dangerous situation. And I do believe that things like medication, if you're seeing the proper doctor and you're taking something like Ativan, sometimes that can be very helpful. And we shouldn't be scared of that if you're seeing the proper doctor. But self-medicating to help with sleep deprivation is a dangerous, dangerous solution. And doing things like taking 10 minutes before you go to bed to do a mindfulness intervention can really help to get you into a state where you can sleep better. And if that doesn't work, listening to a mindfulness intervention while you're sleeping can be really useful.
It's interesting with the studies where they show, this is the same as a blood alcohol of 0.1,
Yeah,
because I've had this conversation with some of the neuroscientists. There's a high likelihood that the people that took part in that study were probably students of that university that were in bed every night. So for that study, for that period, they were sleep deprived, but probably just for a day or two. We're talking about a profession where they're sleep deprived for 10, 20, 30 years. So I would assume that if you actually broke it down for a first responder, it was way worse than 0.1.
I would agree. Yeah, I would agree. God, it reminds me, there was this other study that was out about sleep and the brain and like atrophying of some area of the brain. I can't remember it right now, but yeah. Oh, yeah, the impact is incredible.
Yeah, well, even, speaking of atrophying, so what I do know is sleep deprivation causes demyelination of the myelin sheath, as does TBI. So you've got, a combat athlete or, the SWAT member who's a breacher or an ex-military member that became a firefighter, and now you're compounding head injury with more head injury. So
Yes,
that's another under-discussed element.
yes, TBIs, concussions, yeah, there's a lot there.
Absolutely. All right. Well, I want to move to some closing questions to be mindful of your
Sure.
time. The first one I love to ask, is there a book or are there books that you love to recommend? It can be related to our discussion today or completely unrelated.
Oh my gosh. Okay. God, I wish I could remember the name of it. The man who mistook his head for a hat or something like that. Let me try to remember it and I could send it to you. It's just a really great book on connecting, obviously the tried and true, which is um, the one about the mind body connection. The body keeps the score. That's a tried and true, but that's a hard one to read. It's like a lot and really in depth. This one that I'm trying to recall the name of is a fun way of getting there, and it's just really it shows the connection that we have, the mind body connection, which our body holds so much information, but if we're not tuned into it, we just don't know. And so training to tune into our body is really, really key. And then the second book is called, I think it's called The Gift, and it's about our about our ability, our intuition. Do you know that one?
Which
Yes.
one? I actually had Edith Eger on the show.
Oh, really?
I think it was the other one she signed, The Choice. But yeah, amazing, amazing woman, Auschwitz
Yeah.
survivor turned
Yes.
psychologist.
Yes. Yeah. So those are some good ones.
Beautiful. Well, then what about films and documentaries?
Oh gosh. Okay, I can't even touch that. I am such not a movie um like any pop culture music movie I'm really bad at.
I just watched, it was a 2-part documentary on the Jerry Springer show. And obviously he passed away a couple of years ago. So now they're kind of, putting it out there. But if you want to see, the kind of origin story of this horrendous kind of reality
Oh my
TV
god.
culture that we've got, but also, I mean, just there's no other way of putting it. The lack of ethics, like the horrible human beings that were behind that show that
Oh,
had no
horrible.
regard whatsoever about the real lives that they were displaying.
Horrible.
It is nauseating. But then you look at the narcissism on social media, and you look at the way our news is done now, and the way that these god awful politicians behave in election time. It really, there's a lot of kind of genesis from that was a turning point where TV just fucking went down the toilet. So even though it's not a nice thing to watch, it's not an enjoyable watch because you just want to reach through the fucking TV and punch them square in the face, but it
Yeah.
really does show you where this kind of idiocracy really started.
But it is interesting. I can't wait to watch that. I'm going to watch it, and it's interesting to think that we looked at that and we're like, God, this is disgusting. I can't believe we got here in life. And now look where we are.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Exactly.
it
And
could
then
just it just evolves, doesn't it? It's
mhm.
like building blocks of shit.
Exactly. And it is.
Okay,
And
wait.
it's that,
Yeah.
well, I'll watch this because then I can feel better about my life versus why don't I improve my
Yeah.
life? And it's
Yes.
a very sad state of affairs.
And I'm obsessed with like narcissism. I mean, it is narcissism and psychopathy. Like both those, for some reason, I never get enough of that. But yeah, I want to watch this Jerry Springer. That's a shit show that ruined tons of people's lives.
Absolutely. Well, one of
But
the
I will
cases they
say,
highlighted was a murder suicide as well. There were
yeah,
three
yes,
guests.
yep, yeah, that's horrifying.
Yeah. Actually, sorry, not
Um,
murder suicide. It was forgive me. It was a murder, brutal murder. With his hands and feet. But yeah, then it was all really amplified by the fact that they'd ridiculed them all on television.
yeah, was it the one episode where this person came out as gay and he talked to this guy that he was attracted to, and the other guy was straight?
That wasn't the Jerry Springer show. I know what you're talking about, and that I think was a different show. But this one
Yeah,
was, he was married to this woman, I think, or dating this woman, I forget. But he was from Germany. He was now with another woman. The way that this woman was told the show was going to go was complete, smoke and mirrors, bait switch.
yeah.
She good for her. She basically realized it was bullshit and just kind of walked off and left the set. She's like, "Oh, you want to be with
Oh
her?
wow,
Fine,
good.
whatever." But anyway, they ended up getting, well, he weaseled his way back into her life for a moment, and then yeah, he killed her in her home. He basically was court order because he was abusive to get out of their house, and a restraining order, and he
Oh
went to the house and killed her. But there is no doubt, and the whole Jerry Springer TV show, all the people there, they all denied that it had anything to do with it. But
yeah, of
they were
course.
lied to. This woman was lied to and then publicly ridiculed. And it was after the show aired, the killer, the husband or ex-husband or whatever he um was at a bar, and I'm sure they were probably all laughing at him at the bar, and that's when he went round and did
Oh
what he did.
yeah,
So to say that the TV show had nothing to do with it is absolute bollocks.
right. Yes, it is bullocks.
Yeah.
Great word for that. Great, great word. But on a lighter side, I did remember my favorite movie, which is The Matrix. For whatever that's worth, favorite movie.
Brilliant. Beautiful. All right. Well, speaking of good people, is there a person that you recommend to come on this podcast as a guest to speak to the first responders, military, and associated professions of the world?
I'm going to think about that because that's a heavy question in a good way. Um, this industry is interesting. It's like people sometimes are like, they say, oh, I understand if you don't want to share your slides or if you don't want to share your workbook. And I'm always like, no, just take it all, because there are just so few people doing this. And I'm not saying like, oh, I'm out there doing the work. I don't mean it like that. I just mean there's plenty of people out there that need help. And the more people we have doing it, the better we are. So, having said that, I don't know many people um, specifically that are doing this kind of work. I do have someone in mind who does some critical incident training, but that's in law enforcement. But that would work too. That I can pass your way, Patrick Halpern. I can't remember his last name, but I'll remember it and get back to you on that.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much. All right. Well, then the last question before we make sure people know where to find you, the classes, the book. What do you do to decompress?
Well, of course I do mindfulness. And if I didn't say that, I think that everyone should fire me. So, one, I do mindfulness, but mindfulness isn't always just sitting and doing a meditation. So oftentimes while I'm doing the dishes, I'm practicing. I'm just noticing my breath while I'm doing the dishes, or I'll just sit and take a moment to notice what I'm feeling in this exact moment. So it's like these weird little moments in between. And then also, I do jujitsu. I love jujitsu. It's my happy place. I literally can't think of anything else but what I'm doing in the moment while I'm doing it. I have to focus. I can't think about what I'm making for dinner or the contract I didn't sign, or I'm thinking, oh my God, I'm about to choke and die. So let me figure out what to do to get out of this. So jujitsu is probably a very a huge outlet for me.
Beautiful. Yeah, I do jujitsu as well, and it was the same thing yesterday. I had nothing wrong with it at all, but what we would call a spazzy white belt, and yeah, there was no thinking about the bills or relationship issues when this guy was trying to smother me with his groin. So kept me very mindful.
I so relate to that. Yes.
All right. Well, then, where first can people find Mindful Junkie, and then where can they find the book?
Okay, so Mindful Junkie is at www.mindfuljunkie.com, and it's Junkie, so Mindfulljunkie.com. And then the book, it has most every outlet has it online. So whether it's Amazon or Barnes and Noble, or you could just search tactical brain training and it will come up. But you can also go to my Instagram, which is at Mindful Junkie. And I have it in my link tree, my link in bio. There's a link for it. So I think if you just did a search, you would find it.
Beautiful. Well,
I have
Gina,
one question for you, James. Wait, before we
please,
go,
please, let's do it.
what do you do to downregulate, and what do you do to practice kind of mindfulness and
Yeah, so the jiu-jitsu, my gym, I do strength and conditioning classes, so that the physicality side is definitely part of that. When I walk my dog, which is usually twice a day, I leave my phone at home, so I try and be mindful on those walks. And obviously things will ruminate a little bit, but I do try and catch myself and just again listen to the birds and just
wow?
try and be present there. So that's a solid hour of a day just on the dog walking side. New Calm, I do that a lot.
Oh, you
Headspace,
do.
yes, yeah. So I'll do
How
that. Usually
often do
the
you think
power
you do
nap.
Newcomb?
I'm sorry, say it again.
How often do you think you do Newcomb?
Um, I like to try and do it when I was writing the book. It would be almost every day. I'd do at least the power naps. That's a 20-minute one. They've got them all the way through to I think it's 70 minutes. But if you're tired, if you're a first responder and you've come off shift and everyone's gone to work and you're home but you can't sleep, I could never nap. I'm just not a napper.
Yeah, me
That
neither.
then I'd lie down and do maybe a 40-50 minute what they call rescue.
Yeah.
And then they have a thing called focus, which is the other way, and that works really well. When I was writing my book, a lot of times I put that in the headphones. So those are really good. And then the Headspace. So I like that guided meditation. So like a 15-minute morning meditation when I'm in that kind of routine. I like doing that as well. So I'm very deliberate in my down regulation. Obviously
Yeah.
learning what I have and knowing that 14 years in uniform, you got to keep topping it up. Otherwise, it will come at a cost. So, and my big thing is the sleep. I sleep, but I'm still working on the sleep quality, trying to get that deep sleep. And that's
Yep.
the juggling, because I'll stop drinking for a while and wait for these supposed amazing revelations that everyone on Instagram tells me. I just stopped drinking for 7 days and now I'm, able to do the splits and, I can run around the earth without taking a breath and all these other bullshit claims that they have. I feel worse after not drinking for a long time. So
Yeah.
it's trying to unpack that. Why do I feel worse when I stop taking this poison in my body? So it's just an
Yep.
unending, work in progress. But that's what happens, if you want to continue to thrive in the world, then as you get older, it just takes more and more work. It is what it is.
Yeah. And making yourself uncomfortable, like doing something that you're not used to doing is uncomfortable. So why wouldn't you revert back to what you were doing before, which was comfortable?
Yeah, exactly. But there's no question my body hates alcohol, even though I
Yeah.
ignore it sometimes. I mean, even just my GI tract, if I have just 2 glasses of wine, I'll have to be careful not to leave, be too far from a toilet for that morning.
Yeah.
So yeah, it
Yeah.
lets me know that it hates it. But
Especially when we're older, it really, really has an effect on our bodies. And they're now coming out with all this research about cancer, the Surgeon General warning, wanting to put that it's, cancer connected to alcohol and on the labels. I don't know. It is poison,
mhm.
but we've normalized it.
Yeah. Like the phrase I've always said is I've never woken up having not drunk the night before wishing I had.
God, that's a lot of double negatives. And but I know what you're saying. What is the voice that you listen to when you listen to the Calm app? What kind of voice do you choose?
I actually do Andy Puddicombe, so the founder of Headspace, and I had him on the
Okay,
show a while ago. He's disappeared into ether now. I think he's probably doing monk retreats again, which is what sent him
great.
into the first place. But I like his. It's very kind of like like a bloke you meet at the pub, um,
Yeah,
versus maybe some kind of earthy,
yeah,
more traditional what you think is a guru or whatever. So because it's just so normal, for some reason that resonates with me a lot. So Andy's voice
yeah.
is the one I still listen to.
Yeah, it cracks me up because in the mindfulness space, one of the main mindfulness people that like everybody, bows down to and is like, "Oh, mindfulness person," um, I cannot stand their voice. Like it sends nails through my face. It's like grating to me. And so it's so interesting to me because people like we all have discernment and you have to find something that you resonate with, whether it's the tone or the sound or the gender or the presentation. There are so many different literal voices out there that we just have to be comfortable with sorting through them to find something that we resonate with. Because I don't ever say who it is that I can't stand, because I would be like outcast from the world. They'd be like, "You are not a mindful person." And meanwhile, I'm like, "La, la, 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 please stop talking."
Yeah, yeah. Even I love Rodney Yee, who does the Gaia yoga videos. But I don't know if it's
Ah,
his wife or it's just his, yoga partner, whatever it is. But there's a
yeah,
lady in there, and no disrespect to her at all, but I don't want to do her one. And so,
right,
I'd rather have a shirtless Asian dude lead me than.
right.
And it's just like you said, we can't explain it, but we're just fickle like that.
Yeah,
So it's
yeah,
okay. Find that thing that works for you. If you want Idris Elba leading you through meditation, so be it. Or Jason Statham, just try not to
exactly.
fucking think about anything. Whatever works for you, then
Exactly.
find your fit.
Find your voice. That's all.
Absolutely. All right. Well, then we've gone over all the stuff. So is there anything else that you want to make sure that we do discuss before we close out?
No, You're amazing. I really appreciate what you're doing and how you're putting all this information out there. I think it's so beneficial to people, and you really touch on so many different great subjects that I think that your audience is so appreciative, and there's something there for everybody. So I appreciate what you're doing.
Well, I want to thank you too. I mean, coming on, sharing your work, and the mindfulness is needed in our professions, obviously, especially if we can get these work weeks, shortened to what they should be.
I
Then we can
know.
really start leaning in, not just how not to die, but the performance side, getting into that flow state as a firefighter, as a police officer. So I want to thank you too for being so generous with your time and coming on the Behind the Shield podcast.
Well, take it easy and let's connect again.